Shalom and welcome. This week, we kind of get a double whammy. Shabbat is Shabbat Devarim when we read the beginning of the book of Devarim, commonly known as Deuteronomy, which talks about the preparations for the Israelites who are about to enter the land of Israel. Interestingly, and somewhat paradoxically, Devarim is always read on the Shabbat immediately preceding the observance of Tisha B'Av, the most solemn, the saddest day on the Jewish calendar. It marks the destruction not just of one temple, but of two Beit Mikdash, holy temples in Jerusalem. And not only that, the temples were destroyed, but the people were sent in exile. Communities were decimated. Our way of life was totally uprooted, and our connection to the land for many years was lost. This year, Shabbat ends and Tisha B'Av begins. So there are a lot of questions. It's somewhat ironic that here we are in 2018, 5778 on the Hebrew calendar. Jerusalem is a rebuilt, vibrant city. The land of Israel is no longer dependent on agriculture for its economy. It's a huge high-tech giant. So we have to ask ourselves, is this fast still meaningful? Should we still be mourning the destruction of the temple when we can sit in synagogue here or even in Israel, in Jerusalem, and see everything going around? Every generation thinks it has invented new things, but interestingly enough, this is not a new debate in the Jewish community. In fact, the prophet Zechariah, who was prophesying in the land of Israel after the first temple had been destroyed and the second one was rebuilt, and people came to him and asked him whether or not they still needed to fast on Tisha B'Av and observe all the practices of mourning and abstinence. Just like Yom Kippur, we don't eat, we don't drink, we don't wear leather shoes. But differently from Yom Kippur, we do go about our daily activities. Zechariah replied, "Thus said the Lord of hosts, there shall be yet old men and women in the squares of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age. And the squares of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing in the squares." What Zechariah did was not only suggest that we would continue to observe this date, but that it would be transformed into something joyous. Just like the Psalm says, that you turned my sackcloth into robes of joy, my mourning into dancing. Tisha B'Av survived this early challenge to its permanent observance, but over time it also became strengthened as a focal point for many other calamities that befell the Jewish people, such as the expulsion from Spain in 1492, and even in the Mishnah, which was codified in the year 200 of the Common Era. They had already identified several things that had to do with the date of the 9th day of the month of Av. In our time, none other than Rabbi Yitz Greenberg has wrestled with this question in his book, The Jewish Way, Living the Holidays. And he asks, what happens to Tisha B'Av in an age of fundamental reorientation when the tide of Jewish history turns from exile to rootedness, from sorrow to increased rejoicing? Is there still meaning to days of remembered grief and defeat? It's a good question, one that I will leave for you to consider and grapple with and perhaps answer for yourself. If Tisha B'Av is not part of your observance, I encourage you to think about how this day might be made meaningful for you. And if you do observe, I wish you all first a Shabbat Shalom and a Tzom Kal, an easy fast.